They called me unsuitable. They locked me out for 10 years and told the children I was missing. But while Solon and Theron were hosting parties in my inheritance, Corvus was finding the truth. The day I changed the codes, my mother screamed I was having a crisis, but the real crisis was the moment they realized I was the only name on the deed. I didn't break the family, I broke their lie. The question remained, was I ready to walk into the center of the storm they'd been enjoying for 10 years? I stood there, looking out from the 40th floor of the Buckhead Tower. The late Atlanta sun was a heavy, metallic gold, setting the Chattahoochee River on fire as it curved away toward the west. Below me, the city was a quiet, complex grid, much like my life. I had built this success, this quiet control, without a safety net. 10 years. That's enough time to rebuild a life, but not enough to erase a family. I was contemplating the risk-reward ratio of my next professional move when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Reese, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since Grandpa's funeral. The message was a high-resolution image of a large, beautiful stone and timber house, its riverfront view spectacular, buzzing with activity. Reese's caption was deliberately casual. Great turnout for Theron's birthday. Thought you might want to see the place. They call it the Thorne family retreat now. I recognized the unique, heavy stone chimney immediately. It was the Riverside Mansion, Grandpa's house, the single place I'd ever felt safe. Seeing Theron and Eris laughing in the center of the shot, perfectly posed beneath a newly mounted sign, the Thorne family retreat, was like a sudden, physical punch. My hand clenched, turning my knuckles bone white against the cool glass. A quick, sharp memory flashed, Grandpa's voice rough with age, saying, "This house is your safe harbor, Corvus. Never forget that." The memory cut out as abruptly as a broken circuit. They hadn't just taken the house. They had branded it with their ownership, erasing the history I shared with him. Later that afternoon, a thick, glossy, engraved envelope was placed on my mahogany desk, physical mail, demanding attention in this age of digital communication. It was from Awfully, my mother. It was a formal invitation for the annual Atlanta Society Gala, listing Awfully as the chairwoman. I almost laughed. They cut off the daughter, but never the potential donor. The accompanying personal note was the real weapon, delivered via elegant script. "Everyone asks about you. It's best you maintain your distance, dear. Less drama for everyone. But your generous contribution is expected this year." My eyes narrowed as I focused on the passive-aggressive tactic. They demanded financial support while reinforcing the estrangement. It was the ultimate display of entitlement. I realized loyalty without reciprocity is simply compliance. My mother was so trapped by her need for social status that she would sacrifice her own daughter to maintain the facade. But that profound sadness quickly gave way to the cold edge of self-respect. I wouldn't let her define me, nor would I fund their charity while they enjoyed my inheritance. The present danger brought an unwelcome memory to the surface. It was the last time I sat in that family's formal dining room 10 years ago. I was 18, determined to pursue finance at a state university they deemed unsuitable. The atmosphere was frozen, judgmental. My father, Solon, spoke first, his voice stern, devoid of warmth. "This isn't about success, Corvus. It's about family unity. You are making yourself an outsider." Then came Awfully, adding the final, crushing emotional blow. "We just want you to be suitable, honey. Suitable for us." I remembered the air leaving my lungs. I was not a person to them. I was an inconvenient project. Her final words, delivered with a sickening sigh, sealed my fate. "You are simply the daughter we don't know what to do with. No one is waiting for you." I snapped out of the memory, back to the quiet of my secure office. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from the intense realization of the truth. That's when I realized I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased. Not out of sudden anger, but out of their long-held belief in their own convenience. I reached for my phone, pushing down the impulse to dial awfully and confront her emotionally. I would not fight entitlement with emotion. I would fight it with the law. I sent a quick, coded text to Sable, my colleague, and the friend who had seen me through the worst of those 10 years. I need the name of the best estates and real estate law firm in Atlanta. Confidentiality is non-negotiable. Immediately, I pulled up the legal coordinates for the Riverside Mansion, confirming the property's value. My strategy was logic first. If they thought they owned it, I needed to know why. I picked up my bespoke Italian leather purse, leaving Awfully's untouched invitation sitting on the polished wood desk, a small, arrogant piece of trash. I walked toward the door, turning my back on the spectacular river view. I had accepted the loss of my family long ago, but now I was walking toward a confrontation I never sought. I walked away from that office, the river view behind me. The question remained, was I ready to walk into the center of the storm they'd been enjoying for 10 years? The truth was, readiness didn't matter. I had the coordinates of the Riverside Mansion, and I had a 10-year-old scar that demanded justice. Sable, true to form, had secured an immediate appointment with one of Atlanta's premier estates law firms. The office was a hushed world of heavy drapes and polished brass, the true habitat of old money. I met Mr. Hemlock, a cautious man whose suit probably cost more than my first car. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in his office seemed to measure my rising tension. I opened the conversation with professionalism, stating my identity and my concern over my grandfather's estate. Mr. Hemlock was hesitant, citing client confidentiality, hinting at Solon and Awfully's involvement. His initial demeanor confirmed the default family narrative. The law firm was the only place where blood didn't automatically mean loyalty. Here, I was a client, not a disappointment. He confirmed the initial assumption. The original will had slated the Riverside Mansion to be divided equally among the 4 grandchildren. A shared asset, which they had somehow taken over when I disappeared. Mr. Hemlock, I pressed, leaning forward, using the calculated firmness I reserved for major investment negotiations. My grandfather despised high-risk debt, particularly after my father's previous financial missteps. Are you certain that was his final intention, especially knowing I was barely 18? My directness, citing his own memory of Solon's past failures, seemed to unnerve him. He paused, the silence stretching into an unbearable minute. There was a codicil, Corvus, he finally admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Filed one day before your grandfather passed. Your father's firm sealed it, claiming the tenure clause needed review, but it was kept on file. The codicil, a legal amendment, my grandfather's final act. I braced myself. Mr. Hemlock pulled a folder from the inner depths of a safe. He confirmed the shocking truth. The codicil bequeathed 100% ownership of the Riverside Mansion to me. The explicit instruction was to keep it quiet from the core family for a decade, ensuring my safety and giving the document time to legally supersede any attempts to contest it based on undue influence or my young age. My shock was profound, not of greed, but of immense, protective love from beyond the grave. Grandpa didn't forget me. He saved me. This house wasn't an asset, it was a lifeboat. The legal maneuvering, the 10-year delay, was a tactical masterstroke designed to neutralize Solon and Awfully's manipulative tendencies. Afterward, I met Sable at a high-end cafe a few blocks away. I was running the revelation past her, trying to process the enormity of Grandpa's love, when Eris walked in. Corvus. Eris exclaimed, her voice pitched with practiced sweetness, approaching our table. "Oh, you must be here for that financial seminar. You never responded to Awfully's invitation, dear." Sable shot me a warning glance. Eris, all practiced grace, casually launched into her spiel. She said Awfully felt bad about my distance and was extending an olive branch. She then invited me to an exclusive Thorne family day at the Riverside Mansion, treating me like a distant relative getting a special pass. "It's only for the core family, of course," Eris added, the condescension sharp. "But consider yourself a guest, Corvus. An honored guest if you behave." My mind, still reeling from the codicil news, found its footing. I maintained a blank expression, letting Eris's words hang in the air. I gently refused, using her own language against her. "Thank you, Eris. But I prefer to entertain at my own sanctuary." I excused myself before Eris could process the double meaning, leaving her standing bewildered between our table and the dessert display. As Sable and I slipped out, the weight of the secret settled heavily. For a decade, they had been operating from my house, enjoying the safety net Grandpa provided for me, mistaking my inheritance for a family asset. My resolve hardened. The goal was no longer just emotional closure, but honoring Grandpa's memory and securing his final wish. My grandfather's final act was a declaration of love. I won't let them erase that too. Sable confirmed the next step. Before taking legal action, I needed physical proof that Solon hadn't destroyed the original codicil or any related documents. I had to get inside the mansion before they realized their foundation of lies was crumbling. They had been living in my sanctuary for a decade. I told Sable, "Would you walk away or play along to survive? What would you risk to honor a promise to the dead?" I had the legal truth, but the real power was in the history waiting inside the gates of my mansion. I spent the rest of the day and most of that night in my apartment, not as Corvus the estranged daughter, but as Corvus the portfolio manager. My first step was not emotional, but forensic. I utilized my secure professional access to comb public records and financial databases, searching for any transaction tied to the Riverside Mansion address. That's how I found the first piece of undeniable proof, a large commercial loan recently secured by Thorne's logistics company. It was a high-value loan, and the documentation clearly indicated the Riverside Mansion as the collateral location. Thorne was using a property he did not own to back his debt. I recognized the tactic instantly, a soft form of fraud common when family members imply shared or future ownership to leverage assets. He didn't just move in, he capitalized on it. I realized that Thorne leveraged my security, my inheritance, for his risky venture. This wasn't ignorance or a mistake. This was deliberate criminal exploitation. Armed with the knowledge of Thorne's financial maneuver, I drove out to the mansion the next afternoon. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day the core family would be busy maintaining their perfect social facade in Atlanta. I was dressed in plain clothes, moving with the stealth of someone breaking into their own life. I used the old service entrance code, a sequence of numbers Grandpa had taught me for emergencies, and the gate slid open with a faint hydraulic hiss. The air was thick with the scent of pine and river water, a scent that triggered immediate, overwhelming grief. The house was cold, quiet, and fundamentally wrong. I moved through the rooms, snapping legal photos with my phone. Grandpa's old, magnificent library had been gutted and turned into Thorne's executive retreat, reeking of expensive scotch. But the most painful violation was upstairs. My old, untouched bedroom, where I had spent countless summers reading, was now Eris's cavernous walk-in closet, overflowing with seasonal clothes. There was no trace of my past, no memory of me. I looked at a recent, framed family photo on Eris's vanity, a picture of a large group by the river dock, Awfully, Solon, Theron, Eris, all smiling. I was clearly photoshopped out, leaving a small, unsettling empty space between my parents. This visual proof of systematic erasure was the sharpest emotional blow yet. I paused in the middle of that ransacked room, touching the spot where Grandpa's favorite armchair used to sit. He built this sanctuary for me. They turned it into their weapon against me. My sorrow was profound, not for the lost room, but for the profound lack of decency. I returned to the den, ignoring the modern renovations. I felt an urgent need to find the truth Grandpa had hinted at. I remembered his love for hidden compartments and puzzles. I bypassed the shiny, new liquor cabinet and pressed on a specific, non-functional spot on the old, built-in bookshelf. I heard a faint mechanical click. A loose panel behind a book slid open. Inside, I found a dusty, leather-bound journal. I was trembling as I pulled it out. This was not the codicil itself, but something far more valuable. The final entries were written in Grandpa's shaky hand. He detailed his fear of Awfully and Solon manipulating his estate. He confirmed, "I changed the will to protect Corvus, but I fear they will attempt to conceal the codicil. They will use her silence against her." The final entry explicitly stated Solon's plan to testify a different will if I ever challenged them. I sank onto the carpeted floor. The fury I felt was no longer simple hurt. It wasn't passive neglect. It was calculated malice. And they used my own innocence as their defense. As I stared at the damning script, a loud sound ripped through the quiet house, the distinct, aggressive growl of Theron's high-end sports car pulling up the driveway. They were home early. My phone vibrated furiously. It was Reese, the cousin who had sent the photo. His cryptic text flashed. "They're moving papers. False documents. Get out now." Reese's warning confirmed the immediacy of the threat. I shoved the journal under my jacket, adrenaline flooding my veins. My decision was immediate: survival over confrontation. I fled through the back service entrance, Grandpa's old escape route, narrowly avoiding a direct encounter with Theron as he strode toward the front door. I knew one thing for certain as I drove away. They felt entitled to everything, even my inheritance. Sometimes your family is the one that hurts you most. Ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? I had the diary, the evidence of malice. Now I needed to make them pay the price of their entitlement. I drove until the frantic surge of adrenaline subsided, parking on a quiet street outside the perimeter of the mansion property. I knew I had barely escaped Theron. I opened the leather-bound journal, the faint scent of my grandfather's old pipe tobacco offering a brief, protective shield against the betrayal I felt. I rapidly scanned the final entries. Grandpa wrote about his fear of awfully pushing Solon to contest the will and his certainty that they would use my decade of absence as proof of my instability. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The 10 years of silence were not just their neglect. It was a calculated conspiracy rooted in greed. The journal contained a powerful quote, scribbled on a half-torn page. They mistake loyalty for weakness and silence for absence. But sometimes, the kindest heart is the one that sets the firmest boundaries. This philosophical thought, straight from my grandfather, gave me the clarity I needed. I realized my goal wasn't revenge. It was securing his legacy. Inside the back cover of the journal, I found a sealed envelope. My hand shook as I pulled out the crisp, legally stamped copy of the actual, final codicil. This was the physical proof that backed up my lawyer's confirmation. I cross-referenced the dates in the diary with the commercial loan documents I'd found. The timeline confirmed Theron had leveraged my asset almost immediately after the codicil should have been shared, suggesting collusion with Solon. They banked on my silence. They didn't just steal the house, they stole the time. They stole a decade of sanctuary, believing I would never come back to claim it. My last thread of childish hope, the belief that my estrangement was merely a misunderstanding, was now completely severed. My phone buzzed, vibrating on the passenger seat. It was Reese. I opened the message. Reese's text was frantic. "They're moving papers. False documents. Looks like Solon and Thorne are preparing to challenge something. Act fast. They're preparing a countersuit." The external confirmation from Reese showed they were actively moving to formalize their fraudulent control. I couldn't delay the legal transfer any longer. The threat was immediate, and I needed to use prudence, not panic. I shoved the journal and the codicil copy deep into my professional leather satchel. I pulled out my phone and quickly composed a text to my lawyer, the one I had met only a day earlier. The message contained only 2 words: initiate transfer. The time for negotiation was over. The time for law was now. I put the phone down, feeling the rush of absolute certainty. Funny how pain becomes the thing that wakes you up. I finally understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to draw the line. What would you have done in my shoes when the truth hit you? I had made the first move. Now I would wait for the first explosion, knowing the silence was finally broken. I arrived back at my apartment, the physical evidence of Grandpa's diary and the codicil safely secured. The quiet, heavy mood in my small living space was now reflective, not panicked. I stood before my small, fireproof safe, looking at the symbols of my past. I reached up and gently slipped off a small, worn silver ring, the last physical gift Awfully had given me before the estrangement. It was a tangible symbol of the childish hope for reconciliation I had secretly carried for a decade. I placed the ring inside the safe, next to the diary and the codicil copy. This was the true moment of separation. The silence in that room was deafening. I realized I wasn't fighting them. I was finally letting go of the phantom of the dutiful daughter they wanted me to be. The love I remembered was gone, and I had to accept the loss of what was never real. This was not vengeance. This was a stoic acceptance of the ultimate loss, allowing me to move forward with a clear, legal conscience. 24 hours after contacting my lawyer, the time for decisive action had arrived. I met the team from my real estate lawyer and the security company near the Riverside Mansion property line. The mood was professional and fast-paced, reflecting a legal operation, not an emotional siege. We posted a notarized, certified legal notice prominently at the front gate, warning against trespassing in accordance with Georgia property law. I used the hidden compartments mechanism, which I had thankfully found before Thorne returned, to retrieve all remaining personal items left by my grandfather, some old photos, a brass telescope, and a sentimental fishing rod. I loaded them into my car. These things were priceless, and they were finally safe. While the security team efficiently replaced the entire electronic gate system and all exterior locks, my legal right as the owner, I had a professional security camera system installed, linked directly to my phone. I wanted constant, undeniable control. Back in the solitude of my apartment, I drafted the final communication. I deleted 3 separate drafts that had been filled with justifiable anger and emotional accusations. That was giving them power. My final choice was cold, formal, and strictly legal. I sent the brief emails simultaneously to Solon, Awfully, Thorne, and Eris, copying my lawyer's office. The subject line was simple: subject, Riverside property ownership. The body was even shorter. Dear all, as the sole legal owner of the Riverside Mansion, the locks and gate codes have been changed, effective immediately. Any personal belongings remaining on the premises will be boxed and sent to Thorne's residence. This is not open for discussion. Corvus. I didn't need them to understand my pain. I needed them to understand the boundary. That silence hurt more than any words could. Now, the silence would be mine. I immediately set my phone to silent, placing its screen down on the counter. The phone began to vibrate almost instantly, a relentless, furious humming, an avalanche of rage I couldn't hear. I sat there, laptop open, watching the newly installed security feed. The gate was empty, locked, and inviolable. I was waiting for the inevitable explosion. I looked at the buzzing phone and felt a wave of catharsis wash over me. I finally understood the core strength of solitude. What's the moment you realized you were truly alone and then decided to rely only on yourself? The silence was over. It was time to watch the iron gate hold the line against the storm. I was sitting in my apartment, sipping coffee, when the high-intensity drama began. I was watching the security feed on my laptop, the image of the Riverside mansion gate sharp and clear. The pacing accelerated instantly from quiet tension to aggressive chaos. Thorne's massive SUV screeched to a halt right outside the new gate. Awfully, Eris and Lumen tumbled out, quickly spotting the legal notice and the new security system. Thorne immediately began shouting, his face red with pure, unadulterated shock and rage aimed directly at the intercom camera. I took a deep, steadying breath. I connected to the intercom, but put the conversation on mute for a few seconds, letting them vent their initial fury. I watched Thorne hammer his fists against the iron bars. They still don't see the house. They only see their ruined weekend. They haven't been erased. They've been inconvenienced. I unmuted the line. My voice was low, even, and professionally devoid of emotion. Thorne, you received the email, I stated. The property is legally mine. You are trespassing. Thorne immediately escalated, his voice shrill through the speaker. Corvus, what the hell is this? Are you kidding me? Open this gate immediately. You've ruined the whole weekend. I heard Solon's voice, muffled, whispering legal advice to Thorne. Thorne shouted about the family and their right to the house built by their shared blood. I didn't flinch. The law in Georgia recognizes the codicil. I responded, delivering the legal punchline with cold precision. You should review the documents your father withheld 10 years ago. If you continue, the police will be called for trespassing and potential loan fraud. I had just escalated the stakes from family drama to financial crime. Then, Lumen stepped forward. The pacing slowed, the silence highlighting the genuine cruelty of her next move. Lumen shoved her two small children near the gate, using them as living shields. She began to cry theatrically. Corvus, the kids. They think this house is magic. You are destroying their happy place, all because of your petty jealousy. This isn't about property. It's about kindness. I felt a profound, sharp pang of pity for the children, but not for Lumen. They are using innocence as their shield. That is the true cruelty. My humanistic value demanded I protect the children from being used in this fight. I refused to engage with the children's emotions directly. I issued my final warning to the adults, cold and clear. I instructed the monitoring security team to call the local sheriff's department immediately if the family did not vacate the property line within 5 minutes. The threat of police involvement and public scandal, the very thing Awfully feared most, finally broke the stalemate. Awfully physically pulled Thorne away from the intercom, her face a mask of panic. Solon, my father, looked utterly defeated, staring at the manicured ground. His final attempt at control had failed. This isn't over, Corvus, Awfully yelled, her voice trembling as she retreated. You cannot tear a family apart over a house. You need help. I stared at the camera as they retreated to their SUV. I knew the fight was shifting from the gate to the courtroom. I wasn't tearing the family apart. I was simply refusing to be their scapegoat any longer. I closed the laptop. When they attack your sanity, you realize you have to draw a line in the sand. If you've ever had to cut ties for survival, you'll understand this. They couldn't breach the gate, but I knew the next battle would be fought on the poisoned ground of public opinion and the courts. A day after the confrontation at the gate, I was in my high-rise office when the urgent email from my lawyer landed. The subject line alone was enough to make my blood run cold. They had been served. The news hit me like a physical blow. Solon, leveraging his past career as a respected Atlanta lawyer and his deep legal network, had filed an emergency temporary restraining order, TRO, on the Riverside Mansion title. The legal lie was staggering. The TRO filing falsely claimed I was experiencing a psychological crisis due to the 10-year estrangement. Solon's argument stated that my aggressive action, changing the locks, was proof of mental instability and that I was attempting to liquidate the family asset purely out of spite. They didn't just want my house, they wanted my sanity. They attacked the one thing they couldn't control, my mind. The affidavit was full of sickening paternal concern, claiming he was protecting me from making irresponsible, vengeful decisions. The sheer irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I immediately met with my legal team. The dialogue was fast and urgent, focused on strategy. My lawyer was grim, warning that a TRO hearing in Georgia, especially against a well-regarded family like the Thornes, would be damaging to my professional reputation, regardless of the eventual outcome. They think I'm too damaged to fight back, I stated, my voice steady despite the internal tremor. They are wrong. We will use their own history against them. The codicil is the law, but the diary is the motive. The lawyer agreed that the only way to quickly invalidate the TRO and counter the psychological attack was to bring in an objective, professional witness. Someone to testify about the nature of family systems and gaslighting, to frame my actions as rational self-preservation, not madness. Later, driving alone through the city, I wrestled with a profound moral dilemma. The diary contained painful, private details about Solon's deep-seated resentment toward his own father, my grandpa. Exposing it all publicly would not just win the case, it would utterly destroy Solon's professional legacy and social standing. I stopped the car and looked out at the city lights. Vengeance means using the dead man's pain. Justice means protecting his memory. I made my choice. I would only use the codicil and the parts of the diary that proved their knowledge and financial motive, not to needlessly ruin Solon's entire life. My fight was for truth and boundaries, not absolute destruction. I immediately called Dr. Vesper, the family systems therapist Sable had recommended. She listened calmly as I explained the gaslighting tactic in the TRO. This legal move is a classic final attempt to control the narrative by the toxic family unit, Dr. Vesper confirmed. She agreed to meet, providing professional validation that I was reacting rationally to abuse. The hope surged. I was realizing I was not fighting alone. I was fighting for my sanity with a professional champion. I had lost my blood family, but I was building a support system based on truth, not obligation. I was facing the greatest psychological test of my life, but I was ready to call my grandmother for the last, true word. I didn't have to call Thea.
She arrived.
My grandmother, Thea, the matriarch of the extended Thorne family, bypassed Solon and Ophelie's mansion and appeared at my small Atlanta apartment unannounced. She was all old-world elegance, her presence a powerful contrast to my modern corporate solitude. Thea was initially sorrowful. She didn't bring judgment. She brought shared pain. She apologized for her decade of silence, admitting she knew Solon and Ophelie were capable of such calculated control, but she lacked the public strength to fight them. I mistook silence for peace, Corvus, she said, her voice soft but firm. I was wrong. Then, she reached into her purse and handed me a crisp, yellowed, notarized document. The last letter Grandpa wrote to her. This was the final, powerful piece of evidence I needed. The letter confirmed his fear of Solon's manipulation, echoing the words in the diary. We sat in my small kitchen, 2 generations staring at the same patterns of betrayal. I showed Thea the diary I found and the horrible cropped family photos. She confirmed the family's long-standing pattern of gaslighting and scapegoating me. They turned your independence into proof of your instability, Thea sighed, running a finger over a picture where my shadow was visible before the crop. My husband knew they would. She reinforced the idea of unconditional love and self-respect. She told me Grandpa would be proud. There is nothing more honorable than setting a boundary against those who feed on your kindness. I realized this confirmation from Thea was the only form of family validation I ever truly needed. It was the anchor that prevented me from succumbing to the shame of the TRO. I had spent a decade feeling like a broken piece of a family. Now, Thea and Dr. Vesper had shown me I was the foundation of a new one. Thea insisted on staying to help prepare the counterattack. The mood quickly shifted from emotional processing to strategic planning. Dr. Vesper arrived, and the 3 of us, the therapist, the matriarch, and the scapegoat, planned the strategy for the upcoming TRO hearing. Thea agreed to provide a formal witness affidavit to the court, countering Solon's claim of psychological instability. Dr. Vesper emphasized that our strategy was not to attack Solon's character, but to validate my rational reaction to trauma, making the TRO look like a manipulative legal extension of emotional abuse. We combined the overwhelming evidence, the courthouse law, Grandpa's diary motive, Thea's affidavit validation, and Dr. Vesper's professional testimony, psychological defense. The case was airtight. Thea hugged me tightly before she left, her embrace worth more than the entire Riverside mansion. Go in there and tell your truth, my child, she instructed. The truth is your only armor. And know this, you were never weak. You were just waiting for your moment. I closed the door after her, feeling a surge of quiet power. I had spent a decade feeling like a broken piece of a family. Now Thea and Dr. Vesper had shown me I was the foundation of a new one. Sometimes the person who saves you is yourself. The stage was set. It was time to walk into the courtroom and expose the family that mistook silence for consent. The setting was a private conference room at the Atlanta County Courthouse, serving as an unofficial, pre-trial mandatory mediation for the emergency restraining order. The tension was palpable, the silence thick and high stakes. I sat straight and composed, flanked by my lawyer and Dr. Vesper. Opposite me sat the Thorne family, Solon, Awfully, Theron, Eris, and Lumen, a united, desperate front. Solon opened with an emotional plea, not a legal argument, asserting my mental fragility. Awfully immediately followed, using practiced tears, stating I must come home and apologize for the misunderstanding over the house. My lawyer cut off the emotional appeals, introducing Dr. Vesper. Dr. Vesper calmly presented the psychological framework. My actions were not symptoms of instability, but a rational, healthy response to 10 years of systematic emotional abuse and scapegoating. I then placed the documents on the table, the codicil law, Thea's affidavit validation, and copies of the most damning pages of Grandpa's diary motive. The sight of the diary, the undeniable evidence of their deceit, crushed Solon and Theron instantly. The power had irrevocably shifted. The focus shifted to Lumen. She, desperate, resorted to the final emotional weapon. She began to cry, arguing that my actions had ruined the innocent children's trust and happiness. I maintained eye contact with Lumen. If the house meant so much to them, why did you tell them I was gone? I asked, my voice calm. Lumen, flustered and cornered, let the true answer slip. We had to tell them you were missing/lost so they wouldn't ask why their aunt was never around. The entire room fell silent. This confession proved the calculated erasure and the depth of their pathological need to control the narrative, even to the point of lying to their own children. It was the deepest cut, and Lumen had delivered it to herself. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I did not raise my voice or demand compensation. I brought the diary not to destroy you, Father, I said, looking directly at Solon, who seemed utterly defeated, but to show you I know the truth. You mistook my silence for weakness. You confused your control for love. I do not want your apology, and I do not want your pity. I set the final boundary, giving the ultimate act of non-vengeance. We will not proceed with any countersuit for emotional damages or financial fraud. You may keep the costs of the loan. I am simply withdrawing my presence. The Riverside mansion is mine, and the TRO is invalid. The family's perfect facade collapsed. Solon looked broken, awfully quietly sobbed, realizing her social power was gone, and Thorne realized he had lost the collateral for his business. I walked out of the room, leaving the chaos behind. Dr. Vesper placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You didn't win out of revenge, Dr. Vesper had said softly. You won by choosing peace. And that's not selfish, Corvus. It's survival. I walked away from the courthouse, and for the first time, I wasn't scared of what I lost. I was excited about what I had finally found. The house was finally mine. But the greatest gift was the quiet certainty that my life was now truly my own. Several months later, the Riverside mansion was no longer the Thorne family retreat. It was simply home. It had been fully cleaned and respectfully modernized, honoring Grandpa's original architecture. I hosted a small, intimate gathering. Not a revenge party, but a celebration of boundaries. Sable, Reese, and Thea were there. I looked at Thea, strong and peaceful by the river, and felt immense gratitude. I raised my glass of iced tea to the small group. To the truth, I toasted, my voice ringing clear. To the courage to choose ourselves, and to the strength of the chosen family. Reese later quietly updated me on the situation in Atlanta. Thorne had lost his collateral and was facing severe financial turmoil. Solon and Awfully were isolated, their carefully constructed social facade crumbling due to the public exposure of the TRO and their desperate actions. I accepted this as a natural consequence, not an act of vengeance. Later that afternoon, I walked toward the riverbank, drawn by a memory. Grandpa had mentioned burying his greatest treasure under the big old oak tree by the water. I dug carefully and found a small, tarnished metal box. My heart pounded, not with greed, but with anticipation of his final message. Inside the box was not money or jewelry. It was a faded photograph of me as a child with Grandpa, laughing, and a small, engraved silver locket. Tucked beside them was a handwritten note. My dear Corvus, they will try to tell you that you are alone, but you never were. This house is your sanctuary. Guard it, but never let it become your prison. The greatest wealth is your independence. Don't ever trade it for false loyalty. I put on the locket, realizing Grandpa's lesson was not about property, but about self-reliance. Grandpa didn't just leave me a mansion. He left me a doctrine. I decided to use the mansion as a place of refuge, a safe harbor for people like Reese, Sable, and others in the extended family who had suffered under the Thorne's rigid control. I had become the matriarch of the healthy family branch. I used to think that finding closure meant getting an apology. Now I know that closure is simply realizing you no longer need one. I walked down to the riverbank, the sun setting over the water. The silence, which used to be a sign of their neglect, was now my peace. My independence was the greatest victory. Sometimes closure doesn't come from them. It comes from you. Have you ever lived something like this? Tell me your story below. I read everyone.